Good afternoon everybody, happy Friday and welcome back to my craft room for the third time this week. It's been so much fun to spend extra time with you and I'm looking forward to sharing some more new crafting goodies with you this afternoon. I'm rubbing in hand cream because I've been working with card all week and my hands get really dry, so just let me finish doing that. And if you are here, do say hello and let me know that you're there. Let me know if you can hear me okay and see me okay. And I'm just, as always, going to flick over to my iPad, have a look at what you can see and check that everything looks all right. Okay. Let's find myself, and it looks like I'm there live. Hooray! That's always a good start, isn't it? Alrighty, so how has your week been? Mine has been a lot of fun. It's been super busy with the new catalogue launching, answering lots and lots of emails, placing your orders for you. This is my third live session this week, so I've had lots of chances to chat to you, which is always good. And I had a class yesterday, my monthly card class, the in-person class. That was a lot of fun too. I've sent out the by post version this morning. We may have had chocolate cake yesterday. I'm sorry I can't include that if you do the class by post. But yes, there's not much I can do about that. I don't like to think what state your cake might arrive in. But yes, we had cake yesterday, as always at my classes. So I like to bake and I like to share what I bake with you. So that was last week. What did you do during the week? And what are you doing at the weekend? I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's an absolutely beautiful day weather-wise here in the New Forest. The sun is out. I'm looking through my window now. There's a little bit of high cloud, but nothing to worry about. Lots of blue sky. The garden's looking beautiful. I can almost see everything growing. And the forecast for the weekend is good. I'm seeing my daughter and her girlfriend on Sunday, which I'm really looking forward to. It feels like forever since I saw her. And we're going to a maker's market in Southampton, which will be nice, I think. I haven't been there before, so I think that's going to be something new and interesting. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the camera down to my desk and I'm going to show you what's in the Sun Prints suite, which is a brand new suite in the new catalogue, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. I've got lots of crafting to do, a couple of techniques and quite a lot of sample projects to show you as well. So let's get started. Okay, so as always, I'm fiddling around with my settings to try to get everything showing the right way. Okay, and trying to get as much of my desk showing for you as I can. Okay, let's see how that looks. It'll take a minute before I can see what you can see. I'm going to try and hook up my wire. Okay, so we can move all this up quite a lot more, I think. There we go, that looks better. A bit of washi tape to hold my microphone cable off my table. There we go, I've just got to leave myself enough that I can actually move. Right, I think we're there. All right, so I have the Sun Prints things lurking here underneath, but what I need to show you is where they are in the catalogue. So most of it, well, all of it is shown on page 90. So if you've got your catalogue, you should be able to find that there. And I titled today's session Beautiful Blues because there are some gorgeous shades of blue in this. Now, it's not all blue. There is also white and grey granite in the paper, and I'll show you the paper properly in just a moment. But the blues really are stunning. We've got Pacific Point, we've got Night of Navy, and we've got Starry Sky. So these slightly darker and intense blues but they are really beautiful. So the suite comprises patterned paper, an embossing folder, a set of stamps and some dies, all of which I'm going to show you properly in a minute. The embossing folder is shown in quite good detail on page 176. It's the Fern 3D embossing folder. And of course you can get everything individually, or you can just use the one code on page 90 and order everything. You get the discount bundle of stamps and dies, and that one code just saves you having to put in all the different codes for the individual things. Right, so that's where it is in the catalogue. Let me move that out of the way. And let's show you the stamps first of all. So this is Nature's Prints. We have 4 sort of botanical images. There's a little flower here. There's, I don't know what this is. I'm calling it a fern rather than a leaf. If any of you are botanically minded out there, you can tell me what that is. There's this silhouette here, which is a little series of grasses, and then this lovely fern silhouette here. There's also an ink splat, which is always a useful stamp to have in your arsenal, I think, and then 4 sets of words. They read, "You're on my mind," "Hello there," "A heartfelt thank you," and "Best wishes and happy thoughts." So very usable words there as well. And again, I like this, the fonts they've used. They've used a mixture of a handwritten font and then a block capital font, and I really do like that. So Maureen's here. Hello Maureen. And Sandy's here. Sandy says hello to everyone, and she has just ordered this suite. I'm sure you're going to love it, Sandy. The stamps are red rubber, so you don't need a foam stamping mat with them because they've got the foam already on them. And Maureen is saying hello to everyone too. I'm so pleased you could join us, Maureen. These are the dies. They are called, let me just check I get this right because I haven't learnt all the new names yet, Natural Prints dies. So there are dies which cut out the flower, the fern, the grasses, the other fern here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 open dies. And then there are a selection of other dies which cut out other shapes that there's not a stamped image for, but which coordinate really nicely. So there's this big wreath stamp. This is really detailed, but it cuts nicely, so it's not a fiddle. And then there are 2 other kind of botanical shapes. What can I put these on so you can see them? I'll put them on my scrub. I always mean to have a piece of dark card handy and I always forget. There we are. So these dies don't cut out stamped images, but they're ever so useful. So you've got this tall leafy one and you've got this kind of shorter leafy one, and there are 2 of these dies and 3 of these. You're probably always going to want more than one of the shapes as you cut them out, so it's really nice to have the extra dies so you can cut out several with just one pass through your die cutting machine. So those are the dies. And I don't know if you've, I've got that, I need to slide that in that way. I don't know if you've spotted the glittery washi tape I've got on these. It's come off there. I need to put another piece on there. I put these on everything that I get for free just because I am a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. And it reminds me just how many goodies you can get for free when you're a demonstrator. So don't forget that it's a really good time to join as a demonstrator at the moment, because you will get a huge bundle of in-colour goodies for free. Included in your starter kit. You get some other free things as well, which you can choose, but you get all the ink pads, all the patterned paper, some grid paper, and a pack of mixed colour card in the new 5 colours. So if you're interested in joining, do let me know. I can answer all your questions and tell you more about it. It's really something that there is no downside of. Being a demonstrator is fantastic. You make new friends, you've got access to all kinds of crafting activities, and it's always more fun to craft with friends, isn't it? And if you wish, you can demonstrate, you can run classes, you can collect orders from your friend, but there's no obligation to do that. So let me know if you've got any questions on that. This is the Fern 3D embossing folder. It's a one of the, well, it covers a C6 card front. I'm not sure exactly what that measures. Let's have a look. That measures about 6 inches by about 4 1/4, that folder. And I've embossed it here on a piece of white card. And let me just wait for my iPad to catch up. I'm hoping you can see, let's put it that way, that would probably show you more. You can see that the embossing is at different depths. It's really, really beautiful. It also looks stunning embossed on vellum. It's beautiful on card, as you can see. So Sandy is telling me she thinks this is a ginkgo biloba, that one. I'll have to look that up, Sandy. If it is, she says it's the oldest tree in the world. Well, thank you. That's something I have learnt. And let's show you the paper. So this paper is called Sun Prints. It's 12 by 12 inches and you get 12 sheets in a pack. There are 6 double-sided designs, so you get 2 of each design. Now these are all based on cyanotypes. Cyanotype printing is quite an old method of printing and it's quite involved. You have to mix chemicals, coat your paper and let it dry, and then you lay onto your paper whatever you want the print to be. In this case they've used botanicals. Then you expose it to UV light, so you need some sunshine, and then you take it away and you rinse off the chemicals and you let it dry, and then you have your print. And whatever you've laid on the paper protects your paper from the UV light, and therefore you end up with often a very detailed print of what it is, but it's quite an experimental process. It's one of those things where you'll get different results every time. And obviously it's quite messy, it needs the sunshine, and it also uses chemicals. I think it's much easier to buy your paper like this, where the printing has already been done for you and then transferred to your paper. So that gets my vote. So anyway, that's what this is, and it's why it's called Sun Prints. So this first sheet has got an overall design, lots of different ferns, some flowers. And if you look carefully, you can see it's the images that are reflected in the stamp set as well. And on the back, we've got grey granite. So again, the look of a cyanotype, but your background this time is grey granite, which is a grey with a slightly brown hint to it. The next one, I think this is my favourite. This is absolutely beautiful as used as a whole piece for a scrapbook page. Let me just see if I can slide it in between my tripod legs and show you the bottom, because the bottom part is the nicest part. So this has got a lot of beautiful detail on it, including these little dandelions here. And on the back we've got a sort of like a watercolor wash in blue with light and dark patches. This one again is more like a watercolor print, but you've got these kind of spots on here which are echoed in your stamp there, and you've got all the blues on here, including this bright Pacific point. And then on the other side, a nice stripe which looks like it's been done with a watercolor brush, a brush loaded with watercolor paint, because the stripes are all slightly irregular. Then we've got another blue with prints on it. And on the other side we have grey granite with a sort of a distressed look, and I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but some pale script on it. So we've got a sort of a distressed script on there as well. So a really nice background paper, this one, or lovely if you stamp on it. Then there's another grey here. This time this is a one-way design with ferns and grasses on it. Let's bring that up a little bit too. And then on the back, somebody spent an awfully long time with a brush and some watercolor paint just doing little dabs on here. So you know, if you load a paintbrush with paint and then paint without adding any more paint to your brush, the dabs will get lighter and lighter, and that's what we've got here. So that's a lovely background paper again. And then finally we've got another cyanotype here. Again, all the blues, Night of Navy, Starry Sky and Pacific Point, as well as some white. And then on the back, another all over pattern, but this time with a grey granite background. Quite a small scale print, this one. So the papers are really, really lovely, and lots of them you don't actually have to do very much to at all to make a beautiful card or bag or scrapbook page. So I'll put those out of the way and let's make something. So I have a piece of Starry Sky card here and a white card base. I've used the thick white so that it's strong enough to actually stand up and it won't flop down. And then I have some card for stamping. I'm going to use first of all my grey granite ink pad, and I've got this image and this one here, and I'm going to stamp them both off first before I stamp onto my project. And actually I've got a little hair on there. Let me find a little scrap of card and just hook that off. You probably can't see it, but it will get caught in my stamp if I'm not careful and pick up ink in an uneven way. There we are. Right, now this is a relatively dark ink and I don't want it to be quite as intense as that, so I've stamped off once onto my grid paper, just making sure actually that is the smaller piece. Yes, it is. And stamp that on there, and then I've got this one which is the mixture of grasses, and I'm going to do the same again. Stamp off once and then stamp onto my card front. Now I'm going to change ink colours and just stamp a sentiment. So this is a really simple stamped card, and I'm going to use the Best Wishes and Happy Thoughts. But do you know what? I looked at this stamp and I thought I really like that, but I know I'm going to use Best Wishes on its own, or would want to use Best Wishes on its own much more often than the whole thing. Now sometimes I just mask the piece I don't want with some washi tape, and I'm going to be using my masking paper when it arrives, which hopefully will be next week. And you saw me do that a couple of days ago. But sometimes I actually cut my stamps up. I know, was that a sharp intake of breath I heard from you all? It works absolutely fine to do that. So here is my Best Wishes and Happy Thoughts stamp. So what I did was I actually cut off and Happy Thoughts, and I cut with the back facing upwards so I could actually cut off the correct part of the stamp. I didn't just rely on the placement of the label to tell me where to cut. So I'm going to stamp this on my project, and then I will show you how to put the two pieces back together so you can stamp with it as a whole and you'd never know that it had been cut. So there's my Best Wishes on there, and I'll just finish up this card and then I'll show you that you really can't tell that you've cut your stamp up. So I cut my Starry Sky layer just so I had a very narrow blue border around it. I wanted this to be quite a sort of light and airy looking card. If you haven't done much stamping before, this is a great way to get started. It's one stamp set, 2 colours of ink and 2 colours of card, so not complicated at all. And inside I'm just going to stamp one of the images again. I think I'll go with this one here. Stamp off once just so it's not too intense, and then I'll stamp it across the corner There we are. So that's my finished card, and I'll come back to the stamp in just a moment. So very simple. If you needed a batch of thank you cards, you could just change the words and sit down and, you know, knock out a dozen of these or however many you needed quite quickly. So it's great if you want something simple. It's great if you want a quick card. But let's get back to my cut up stamp. So here's the piece I cut off. Now I didn't carefully shape this. I just snipped along very carefully. And it's got quite a raggedy cut edge on it, but that's deliberate because it makes it much easier then to fit it back against the piece it came from. And if I stamp with that now, you'll see that I can stamp best wishes and happy thoughts with no trouble at all, and you cannot see that that stamp has been cut at all. I can't lift that up to show you. Let me grab a little bit of card. I must have a piece of card in here somewhere. I'm a crafter. Here we go. This is just a little scrappy piece, and then I can lift that up to the camera. My grid paper is a little bit wobbly. It's also blue tacked to my desk. There we are. So you cannot see that that one has been cut apart. Now, how do I decide which stamps to cut up and which stamps to leave intact and simply mask the bits I don't want? Well, if it's a stamp where I think almost every time I'm going to want to mask off some of the words, then I will cut it apart if I can. Sometimes the layout of the stamp means that you really can't snip it apart without damaging some of the stamp. But if I can do that, then I'll cut it apart. And I know that I can always put it back together again and use it as it was intended. But if it's a stamp where sometimes I'll want one and sometimes I'll want the other, then I will mask it when needed rather than cut it up. So I would love to know, have any of you cut your stamps up? And if so, which one? So that is my first card for this afternoon. Let's try and make a little bit of space and bring in the next one. So the next one, I thought I'd do a bit of heat embossing, which I haven't done live for ages. It's a little bit noisy when I turn my heat gun on, but I'm sure you will forgive me that. Right, let me just make sure I've got everything I need. So I have white embossing powder. When you buy embossing powder, it comes, if I can find one, this is heat and stick powder. It comes in a little container like this, which is fine until you come to try to put it back in after you've tipped it on. And you'll see what I mean in a minute when we actually go ahead and do that. But I always keep it in these boxes, which I just get from the pound shop. And it's much easier because you've got a much bigger surface area there rather than trying to get it into a little cylindrical pot. And I always keep a plastic spoon in here so I can pick up the embossing powder and tip it on. So I'm going to put that to one side very carefully so I don't knock it. I've got my Versamark ink pad. This is a slow drying sticky ink. That means that I've got time to stamp, tip on my embossing powder before the ink dries, and I'll talk you through the whole process in a moment and then I'll show you. I've got a very fine paintbrush here in case I get any specks of embossing powder somewhere I don't want them. I have an Embossing Buddy, which we used to have in the catalogue and sadly no longer, but you can still buy these on Amazon or eBay. This is just a little bag with ground up French chalk in it, just talc effectively, and it's used to get rid of fingerprints and static electricity on the surface that you're going to stamp on, and that means that your embossing powder will only stick where you want it to. So here are all my bits and pieces. So again, I have a white card base, and then I have 2 pieces of the patterned paper, and the one I've picked here is the one that I showed you would be a lovely scrapbook page, so it's got the design down one side and across the bottom. So I've cut a panel from that, and then I've cut another piece from part of the page, the part of the paper that was very, very dark with no white design on it. So rather than use a card layer, I've got a double patterned paper layer. I've got an oddment here to go inside the card just to decorate it a little bit. And then I have a die cut label which I have cut using the dies that come with the suite, because I think I forgot to say actually there is a really nice label shape in there as well. So that's my label, and when you cut it you get some sort of embossed detail around the edges. Hope that's showing up. It's always difficult with dark card, but there's a sort of a couple of lines around the edge, which is nice. All right, so heat embossing will give you a shiny raised image in the colour of your choice. So whichever colour your embossing powder is, that's the colour that your image will be. So I'm working on Night of Navy card. I wanted something that was going to show on that dark colour, so I've gone for white embossing powder, but I could have used silver or gold. Those would both have looked nice as well. So I'm going to stamp on it using a slow drying ink. Then I'm going to tip on embossing powder and tip off the excess, and the powder will stick to the ink. So I will get powder stuck on in the shape of my image, which in this case is Happy Birthday. And this is from the Celebrating You set. This is carried over. There are lots of really useful words and phrases in this. So that's the Happy Birthday one. Then I'm going to heat my embossing powder, and that will melt it and give me a finished, beautifully raised image. All right, so let's do that. Now the first thing I'm going to do is dust my card with the Embossing Buddy. I've been handling this, so there'll be oils from my fingertips and probably static electricity on there, and all those things will attract the embossing powder to stick, and I only want the embossing powder to be on my stamped image. Then I'm going to bring in my Versamark ink pad. So this is a clear ink, and I'm actually just going to bring it down towards me a little bit and stamp with it, trying to keep it as central as I can. Now you can also use this ink to give you a sort of a watermark effect, and if I hold that up you might be able to see that. So it's a tone on tone effect, so I often use this for backgrounds as well. Oh, are we back? Yes. It looks like my internet went out just for a minute, and I want to work fairly quickly, otherwise it's a warm day and I don't want the ink to dry, even though it's a slow drying ink. So now I'm just going to tip on embossing powder and then tip off the excess, and you can see how easy it is if I have it in a big container like this. Put that over there, and then my embossing powder has stuck to my stamped image. I'm just going to come in with my paintbrush, because I've got a couple of little flecks of embossing powder, and wherever I've got powder it will melt and stick to my card, and there is nothing you can do to remove it. So be picky at this stage and take off any little flecks that are somewhere you don't want them. There we are. I think that's pretty good. Now I've forgotten, I always forget something, don't I? I've forgotten my peg. I usually hold this with a wooden peg to keep my hands away from my heat tool. So this is a heat tool, and it blows out hot air, a bit like a hairdryer, but the hot air doesn't come out with any force or speed like it does with a hairdryer. If I used a hairdryer, it would just blow the powder off my little piece of card. So I want the heat, but I don't want the whoosh, if you like. I've got 2 speeds on this. The lower speed is great for drying ink if I'm using a slow drying ink, or if I use it when I'm painting as well. But number 2 is what I need to heat with. It takes a moment or two to heat, so I'll hold that away and just give it a few seconds to heat up, and then I'll bring it in and melt the powder. and I will be being extremely careful not to direct it anywhere near my hands, but it would be much more sensible to be holding this in a wooden peg, nothing plastic because that could melt, but just to keep your hands away. It will be noisy, so my apologies for that. So I'm just holding that away and giving it a couple of minutes, not a couple of minutes, a few seconds really, to heat up. I'm going to turn around and hold it from the other end so I don't burn myself, but I'm hoping you could see that start to melt. And if I hold this up, the H through to the Y and the end of the happy word are much whiter because that's where the powder has melted. So let me just do the other half. Okay, so I'm now just checking this, and I can see that all the powder has melted because it's all shiny. There's no sort of powdery look to it. The colouring is even, and once that powder has melted, you want to stop straight away. What you don't want to do is to continue to heat it, because all that will happen is that the powder will get too hot. It will start to sink into your card. It leaves almost like an oily mark, and you can actually burn it, so it will turn brown. So as soon as it's melted, stop heating it. And that's my label all ready. So let me put the card together. So this paper is so pretty that I really didn't think I needed to do very much with it. So I'm letting the paper take center stage, and I'm just adding a sentiment to it. So I'm now layering this pretty piece onto another piece of the same sheet, which just gives me a continuous dark border all the way around the outside. And then I have a landscape card base cut from thick basic white card. So there we are. Now that is actually very pretty like that. You could leave it like that and do nothing more with it if you chose. But I'm going to add my little sentiment down here, and I'm going to pop it up on some dimensionals. As always, I'm using plenty because I don't want this to sink down in the middle. And I'm going to pop that about there, I think. There we are. So that's my card front, and then inside I'm going to stamp. I'm just looking for my Night of Navy ink pad. Here we go. So I'm going to stamp the happy birthday inside, and then add my little offcut of paper. This was just left over when I trimmed the piece for the card front. And it's not the full length of the card, it's shorter, but I think that's quite nice. My pot of glue is still going strong. It's still nearly finished, but there's still enough in it, so I haven't opened a new one yet. But it does need a little bit of a shake to get it going. There we go. So just a little bit of detail inside and on the outside. So there we are, that's some heat embossing for you. So make sure you use an embossing buddy and put your embossing powder in a big box. Those are my two top tips. And I am going to close this up properly because it is so easy to knock it off and get powder absolutely everywhere. Alright, I have one more card to make for you, and I thought I'd bring another technique in with this and a little bit more embossing as well. And actually I could have left the lid off my powder probably. Alright, so I'm going to do an Emboss Resist technique here. So I'm going to do the same heat embossing you've just seen me do, but this time once I've heated the powder I'm going to wash some ink over the top, and where the embossing is, that will resist the ink. So it's going to give me a white pattern on a blue background, so a little bit like the cyanotypes but done in a completely different way. So first I'm just going to clean this stamp and then I can put that out of the way. Alright, so first of all the heat embossing, so exactly the same process as before, but this time I'm working on watercolor paper because I'm going to get it very wet and it will work much better than any other card because it's designed to take a lot of water. So I've just rubbed my embossing buddy over the top. I'll bring back my Versamark ink pad and I'm going to use the Fern and the little flower and the ink spots, and I might bring this one in just on the edges as well. Alright, now this isn't going to be great on camera. It's not good television, stamping clear ink onto white paper and then putting white embossing powder on it. So bear with me, keep up with what I'm doing, and then once I start to put the ink wash on it, you will be able to see exactly what I'm doing in much more detail. So to start with then, I'm going to do my stamping, and because this ink dries really slowly, I can do all my stamping and then put my embossing powder over the whole piece rather than having to do one image at a time. All I have to do is work systematically so that I can see where I've stamped, because it's not awfully easy to see where clear ink has gone onto white card. So I just need to try and remember where I've stamped. I will be able to see if I tilt it up to the light a little bit, but you're not going to be able to, and in fact I can hardly see that myself, interestingly. So I thought I was going to be able to see it when I tilted it up to the light, but I can't. So what I'm going to do instead is add my embossing powder, 1 or 2 images at a time, and then heat everything at the end. Okay, so I can see a couple of things on there. Let's just bring in this one. Where do I want that? There, I think. And then we'll put a bit of a splat and put some embossing powder on those two so I can see where they are, and then I've just got one or two more images that will need to go on there to complete the whole panel. So we'll do the fern again. Yeah, and actually I really cannot see where that is. On white card you can usually see if you hold it up to the light, but the watercolour paper is really hiding those designs. So let me come back in with this one. And then the flower, and then finally a little bit of the spatter down here. Right, so I think that's covered my watercolour panel. Just finish with the embossing powder. And you can be quite rough flicking the back and getting off any excess. And then I'm going to bring in my little paintbrush because I've got a couple of parts here where I can see I've caught the edge of the stamp, so we'll get rid of those, because that's picked up embossing powder where I don't want it. And then I've got a few odd flecks here and there, so I've just made sure to get rid of embossing powder where I don't want it. Alright, I'm going to put the lid on this. And then I'm going to bring the heat tool back in, so I will be as quick as I can with this. Right, so I'm sorry about the noise. So I don't know whether you'll be able to see that, but that is stamped all over. I think you just see a bit of a hint of it. So by tilting it in the light, I can check that there are no dull areas, make sure that everything has been melted. If there were any bits that hadn't been melted, I could just bring the heat gun back in and rework it over those areas and heat them. So you can always come back and do that. You may have noticed as well that I was working quite slowly and systematically and just slowly bringing the tool across. I wasn't waving it around as if it was a hairdryer. It's really tempting to do that, but you will get very uneven heating that way, and it's much better to just work systematically rather than wave it around, and you'll have some bits that will overheat and some bits that haven't melted. All right, so that is ready now for me to do my watercolor wash. So let me come out and make a little bit of space. And I need my Night of Navy ink pad, which has got buried. Here we are. So this is the blue that I'm going to use to paint over the top. And I'm going to just press a clear block onto my ink pad and get some ink on there, and that's going to work as a palette for me. And then I've got a stamping spritzer here, which is just a little spray bottle with a very, very fine nozzle on it, filled with tap water. And I have one of my water painters, and I've picked the one with the wash brush, which is a wide, flat brush, which is perfect for this. And the barrel of that is again filled with tap water. I'm just going to drink some water myself before I go on, because my throat is getting very dry. So Sandy's actually done some research for me. Thank you, Sandy. And she says it's a maidenhair fern, this one. Right, so when I call it a fern, I'm being correct. Thank goodness for that. Thank you, Sandy. Very helpful of you. All right, so now I've got my embossed piece of watercolor paper on a piece of kitchen paper, and actually I'm going to open that up and double it up. This is just to absorb any extra water so that my workspace underneath isn't too wet when I've finished. And I'm just going to spritz this lightly with some water. That's just to help my colour spread. So I don't know how well you can see that. So it's wet, but it's not dripping off there. Then I'm going to bring in my palette. I'm going to push where it says push on the barrel of my brush, which will just drip some water out, and then I can mix that up with my ink to get a really nice pool of colour. And then I'm just going to brush over the top of this quite quickly, although the water that I've put on the paper will stop the ink from absorbing into the paper before I've covered the whole paper. There we are. And I think you can already see the resist happening. So those areas which have got embossing powder on them are resisting the ink. And I'm just trying to vary how dark the ink wash is on there. So I'm using some brushing more ink onto my brush for some of these areas to get them a little bit darker, and then allowing some areas to have a little bit less ink on them. There we are. So let's just dab that and put that out of the way. And then I'm just going to use my heat tool on the lower setting just to dry this quickly. Normally I would just set it aside and do something else for a bit, but it's nice to just dry this off before I do the next stage. So I'm just going to put it on setting 1. If I get impatient, I may turn it up. There we are. So heat setting 1 is much the best one for drying ink or paint. I did blast it up to number 2 just briefly, just to speed things up so that I can get on as I'm live with you. But what I didn't want to do was to get my embossing hot, because then I will start to overheat the embossing, which we talked about before. Before I put my brush away, I'm just going to flush some water through the bristles just to wash out any excess ink so that I put it away clean. I could, if I wanted, just run it under the tap or wash it in a jar of water, but this works really well. So you don't need anything else on your desk. There we are. So that is my resist piece, but one more step. I'm just going to buff over the embossing just to make sure there's no extra ink sitting on top of it. And if there is, it's going to be dry now. So I've just spritzed a little bit of water onto some paper, and I'm very lightly just brushing over my embossing. What I don't want to do is to pull off any blue from the background, because it's a water-based ink, so that will come off. I don't know if you can see that has come up really bright. I'll do the spatters next. I don't know if I can do them up here or not. No, I'm going to have to bring it down here. But some of the ink just sits on top of the embossing, and if you just go over it very gently and lightly, you will pull off any ink that has dried on top of the embossing powder. There we are. So Sandy says it's a great technique. It is really beautiful, Sandy. You're absolutely right. You can do this with all kinds of images. And I thought I had another piece of white to go behind this. So I'm going to actually cut a little piece of white while I'm here, because I want a layer behind that. So that needs to be 5 1/4 by 3 3/4. I'm going to cough, excuse me. And I'm just going to reach across for a piece of white card. I don't think, I've got a loose one on my desk, I don't think that's going to be big enough. No, it won't. I won't be a sec. Let me just reach across. Okay, so what is this? That's 5, so I want a piece. Let's go with 5 1/8, I think, actually, just a little bit smaller. 5 1/8 by 3 5/8. There we are. This watercolour paper is still slightly damp. I'm hoping it will stick nicely. Nonetheless, if not, I'll just have to put something heavy on it. And I'm using a little bit more glue than I normally would, because the paper, the watercolour paper, is quite heavy. So I've just got a really, really narrow white border around that, which probably won't show until I put it onto my card base. Oops, I just wobbled my glue very close to the edge there. Let's just pull that back. I'm just holding that in place a little bit longer than it normally needs, because my front layer is still slightly damp, but that'll be fine, I think. Okay, and now I think that needs some words. So I've got a little scrap of watercolour paper here, and I thought I'd do a thank you. So this is the thank you from Peaceful Moments. Hardly a day goes by that I don't reach for this set. It's very useful. And I'm going to bring back my Night of Navy ink pad and just stamp onto this. Try and get it straight. And I'll snip off a little bit of the excess. It's a little bit long. And that's just going to go on there like that. And I think dimensionals are in order. And there we are. Yes, this needs something heavy to sit on it for a bit because it's still slightly damp. But I think this is such a fun technique, this Emboss Resist. It's always slightly magical when you brush that ink over the top and see the white pattern come out, and it'll work with all kinds of stamps, but this is particularly nice with the white against the blue, I think. Right, so shall I show you a few more samples as well? So we've made 3 today, which I'll bring back at the end, but I have got some more to show you. Okay, so this one uses strips of the patterned paper with just little gaps left between them. That's that same die cut, this time in white, and best wishes and happy thoughts, but used intact. So you can really showcase that pretty paper. And the thing about the blues and whites are that this is going to work really nicely for men's cards or cards for women as well. So on this one, I've worked with the grey granite, and I've used the Fern embossing folder on the front, and then just a few of those little die cuts here and a banner with the heartfelt thank you and some grey granite ribbon. So again, a simple card, just 2 colours, but pretty, I think. This is one that we made in my card class this month. So it's a sneak peek if you're taking the by post version, because yours won't have arrived yet. So this is the new, and I'm trying to think what on earth they're called. I want to say Fabulous Shapes, but I think that's wrong. But I've been using them all week anyway. These new layering dies. And we've used this Fern stamp, stamped off several times because the dark blue Night of Navy ink is quite intense. And then You're on My Mind is stamped over the top, full strength from the ink pad. This is something a little bit brighter and bolder. So we've got a latch there that comes across and holds the card closed. I did this in my team crafting session this month with my team leader. In fact, several of the ones I've just shown you came from that. We had a lot of fun crafting together online and chatting away. So this uses the daisy punch. This is some of the new, I'm trying to think what they're called, glossy gems possibly, but they're new anyway. We also made this little box, which I really like, and this has got some of that detailed wreath die cut on the front. It's a fun little box. It looks a bit like a book. And we've used the grey granite paper on that. And then I came up with this design, which uses lots and lots of the die cut pieces. So I've got the wreath as the base. Excuse me. It's because I've been talking for an hour. The wreath as a base, and then some of the little die cuts that don't fit a stamp. Some of the stamped images cut out. And then I've tied a triple bow in some of the lovely new metallic woven ribbon, which I really love. I've added a best wishes at the bottom. So that's my cut up stamp there. And then some of the new in colour matte dots on the front. So there are lots and lots and lots of ideas there for how to use the Sun Prints suite. Let me just bring back the 3 cards that I've made with you for a final look. So some beautiful blue cards here. This one I added in some grey granite stamping for a very simple stamped card that just used the stamp set and 2 colours of ink. Then we used some of this gorgeous paper here to really showcase that with a heat embossed sentiment, which gives you the ability to have a really nice bright white set of words on the dark blue. And then finally an Emboss Resist technique. So we heat embossed and then I washed a layer of ink over the top, and once it's dried I just made sure that I wiped off any leftover ink from on top of my heat embossing, and that embossing resists the ink so it stays beautifully white. Alright, I'm going to bring you back up so I can say goodbye, because believe it or not, it's gone 3 o'clock. So that hopefully, yes it does, up the right way. Right, so it's the end of another Craft and Chat Live Friday session. Next week we are back to normal with just a session on Friday at 2 o'clock. And I'm going to be doing cards as gifts next week, so that will be what's happening at 2 o'clock next Friday. Whatever you're doing this weekend, I hope you have a lovely couple of days. I hope the weather is nice wherever you are, and I will really look forward to seeing you again next week. So thank you so much for joining me. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.